Police rescue a K9 German Shepherd trapped in the forest, unaware of the shocking truth ahead. The bitter November wind howled through the skeletal branches of the forest as officers Nathan Reynolds and Olivia Carter trudged through the damp undergrowth, their boots sinking into the soft earth with every step. The call had come in barely 20 minutes ago, a frantic report from a nearby resident, claiming to hear relentless barking deep within the woods. At first, the officers assumed it was a stray, perhaps caught in a thicket, but as they moved further into the dense wilderness, the barks took on a desperate, almost human-like urgency. The sound echoed through the stillness, bouncing off the trunks like an eerie distress signal. Nathan adjusted the flashlight in his grip, scanning ahead while Olivia stayed close, her hand resting near the holster on her belt. "This dog better not be leading us on a wild goose chase," she muttered, brushing a damp strand of auburn hair from her face. Nathan smirked but kept his eyes fixed ahead. "Something tells me this isn't just a lost pet." As they pressed forward, the sharp scent of rust and decay tingled in their nostrils, the unmistakable odor of blood tainting the cold night air. Olivia's breath hitched as she spotted the source of the relentless cries, a black German Shepherd, its powerful form trapped in a jagged metal hunting snare. The dog's glossy coat was streaked with dirt and crimson. One of its hind legs twisted awkwardly in the cruel grip of the trap. Despite the obvious pain, its eyes dark, intelligent, and unwavering locked onto Nathan's with a mixture of caution and resilience rather than fear. Olivia's heart clenched at the sight. She had seen enough abused animals to recognize one that had suffered. Yet this dog carried itself differently. "Easy, boy," Nathan murmured, slowly kneeling to examine the trap. The shepherd flinched but didn't growl, its body stiff with tension. Olivia crouched beside him, scanning the worn leather collar still snug around the dog's thick neck. The faint glow of the flashlight illuminated an inscription etched into the aged material, "Jax." Something about the name sent an odd shiver through her, though she couldn't quite place why. "This isn't just a stray," she said, voice hushed. "Somebody owned him." Nathan nodded, pulling a pair of bolt cutters from his belt. "Let's get him out first. We'll figure out the rest later." With careful precision, he worked on the rusted mechanism, his every movement deliberate to avoid startling the animal. Jax whimpered softly but didn't struggle, his eyes flicking between the officers as if assessing their intentions. A loud snap echoed through the trees as the trap finally gave way. Jax yelped, instinctively jerking back, but Olivia was already there, steadying him with a firm yet gentle grip. "SHH, you're okay now," she murmured, running a soothing hand over his side. Despite his clear exhaustion, Jax's ears twitched, his head turning toward the darkness beyond them as if listening for something unseen. A prickle of unease crawled up Nathan's spine, but he shook it off. They needed to get the dog back to the station, get him checked out. "Let's go. I don't like how quiet it is out here." Olivia agreed, and together, they carefully helped Jax to his feet. The dog limped but managed to walk, his posture still tense. By the time they reached the cruiser, Olivia had already called in to notify the station of their find. Jax hesitated at the open car door, sniffing the air before climbing in. As Nathan started the engine, the dog curled into the back seat, his breathing shallow but even. The drive back was oddly silent. The further they got from the woods, the more Olivia's mind raced. Something about this felt off. It wasn't uncommon to find abandoned or injured animals. But this dog wasn't just another lost soul. He had history. A missing pet, a runaway, or something else entirely. When they arrived at the station, the first thing they did was scan for a microchip. What they found left both officers in stunned silence. The database pulled up a report from 3 years prior. Jax, K9 unit. REPORTEDemia during a failed operation. Handler, Officer Mark Calloway. Case status, closed. Olivia's pulse quickened. She recognized the name immediately. Calloway had been part of an undercover task force investigating a large smuggling ring. Before he was killed in the line of duty, his partner Jax had vanished without a trace that same night. Until now. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "You're telling me this dog has been missing for 3 years?" Olivia nodded, unable to tear her gaze from the screen. "And no one ever found him? Until tonight." the weight of the revelation settled over them, thick and suffocating. Jax, unaware of the storm his return had stirred, lay curled up on a blanket they had placed in the corner of the station. His eyes half-flitted with exhaustion. His body bore the scars of whatever hell he had endured. Yet there was still an unmistakable sharpness to his gaze, as if he knew more than he could ever communicate. Later that night, as the station fell into a lulling quiet, Olivia stepped outside to clear her head. The air was crisp, the streets nearly empty. She let out a slow breath, rubbing the tension from her temples, when a flicker of movement across the lot caught her eye. A shadow. It was gone almost as soon as she noticed it, but a sense of unease lodged deep in her chest. Turning back toward the building, she hesitated just long enough to spot the small slip of paper that had been tucked under the windshield wiper of their cruiser. Her stomach twisted as she unfolded it. The message was short, hastily scrawled, but sent a chill down her spine. "Leave the dog where you found him." The station's fluorescent lights buzzed softly as Olivia stared at the note in her trembling hands, her pulse quickening with each passing second. The message was brief, its intent clear, but what unsettled her most was the fact that someone had been close enough to leave it unnoticed. The lot had been empty when she stepped outside, at least. That's what she thought. Swallowing hard, she turned her gaze toward the darkness beyond the streetlights, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the eerie stillness of the cold November night. Her gut screamed that whoever had left the note hadn't gone far. Heart pounding, she folded the slip of paper and rushed back inside, her boots echoing against the tiled floor as she found Nathan at his desk, reviewing the old case file they had pulled up on Jax. "We have a problem," she said, slapping the note onto the desk in front of him. Nathan's brows furrowed as he picked it up, his expression darkening as he read the words. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, rubbing his jaw. "How the hell does someone know we found Jax already?" Olivia crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "That's the part that scares me. Whoever this is, they were watching us. This wasn't just some random warning, it's a threat." Nathan exhaled sharply, his gaze shifting to Jax, who lay curled up in the corner of the room, his ears twitching slightly even in his sleep. The dog had barely rested since they brought him in, his body stiff with the lingering tension of years spent in survival mode. Nathan ran a hand over his face before pushing back from his desk and standing. "All right, first things first, we check the security footage. Maybe we can catch a glimpse of whoever left this." Olivia nodded, following him toward the control room where the station's surveillance feeds were stored. The grainy footage flickered to life on the monitor as they fast-forwarded through the last hour. The lot remained still, save for Olivia stepping outside. But then, just as she turned away from the cruiser, a shadow moved at the edge of the frame. A tall figure, clad in dark clothing, slipped into view for barely 3 seconds before ducking back into the alley. No face, no identifiable features, just the vague shape of someone who had been watching. Olivia clenched her fists. "Damn it. They knew exactly where the cameras were," Nathan grimaced. "Which means they know more than they should." His fingers drummed against the desk as he thought. "We should contact whoever was handling Jax's case back then. Maybe someone on that task force can tell us if this is connected to what happened 3 years ago." Olivia hesitated before nodding. "I'll reach out. But Nathan, what if this isn't just about Jax? What if we're stepping into something way bigger than we realize?" He met her gaze, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. "Then we tread carefully, because whoever these people are, they don't want us digging." The next few hours were spent combing through old reports, calling former officers who had worked on the smuggling case, and trying to piece together the tangled web of events that had led to Jax's disappearance. Most calls led to dead ends, either officers who had retired, transferred, or simply had no additional information to provide. It wasn't until nearly 2 a.m. that they got a break. A former detective named Henry Lawson, who had been involved in the original operation, agreed to meet them in the morning. He sounded nervous, Olivia noted as she set her phone down, like he didn't want to talk over the phone. Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "That's because he knows something." A low whimper from the corner drew their attention. Jax had lifted his head, his ears perked and eyes sharp. Olivia frowned. "What is it?" Boy, the shepherd's nose twitched, and then suddenly he let out a deep, guttural growl. Every hair on Olivia's arms stood on end. Nathan was already moving, reaching for his gun as he strode toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but something had spooked Jax enough to send his instincts into overdrive. Olivia grabbed the flashlight from her belt, inching toward the front entrance. The station was quiet, too quiet, the usual hum of distant traffic muted by an unnatural stillness. She pressed her back against the doorframe, heart hammering. Then, a noise of faint scuff against the pavement outside. Olivia's breath caught. Someone was out there. Without thinking, she flipped off the main lights, plunging the room into darkness. Nathan gave her a questioning look, but understood immediately. They waited. Another sound closer this time. A whisper of movement just beyond the door. Jax's growl deepened, his muscles tensing like a coiled spring. Olivia's grip tightened around her flashlight. And then silence. The heavy kind. The kind that presses against your lungs and makes every second feel stretched impossibly thin. Nathan reached for the doorknob, nodding once at Olivia. On three. 1, 2, 3. He yanked the door open, and Olivia's flashlight cut through the night, illuminating nothing. The lot was empty. No movement, no sign of life. Just the distant flicker of streetlights and the cold wind curling around them. But something was wrong. Olivia's flashlight beam landed on the cruiser where she had found the note earlier. Her stomach dropped. Another piece of paper was pinned beneath the windshield wiper. Swallowing hard, she stepped forward and pulled it free, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the slip. 3 words, hastily scrawled, sent a bolt of ice through her veins. You were warned. The message felt heavier in Olivia's hands than it should have, the weight of its meaning sinking into her bones as her pulse thundered in her ears. She forced herself to swallow, glancing toward Nathan, whose jaw was set in a tight line as he scanned the empty lot with narrowed eyes. The cold wind bit at her exposed skin, but she hardly felt it. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a declaration. Someone wanted them to back off, and they were making sure the message was loud and clear. Nathan stepped forward, plucking the paper from her grasp and staring at the words as if willing them to provide answers. His fingers crumpled the edges slightly before he exhaled through his nose and turned to Olivia. We're not backing down, he said, his voice low, steady. Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. Instead, she turned back toward the station, the feeling of unseen eyes crawling up her spine. They needed to regroup, to figure out their next move. Because if someone was watching them this closely, it meant they were already in deeper than they realized. Jax had stopped growling, but his ears remained pricked forward. His gaze locked onto the darkness beyond the lot as if he, too, was searching for a ghost. Olivia reached down, running a hand along his fur, grounding herself in the solid warmth of him. He was their only real clue in this tangled mess, and now more than ever, she was certain he knew more than they did, at least in the way only a dog could. As they stepped inside, locking the doors behind them, Nathan wasted no time. He grabbed his phone and dialed Henry Lawson, pacing as it rang. Olivia watched, crossing her arms, her mind racing through possibilities. The smuggling ring, the failed operation, Jax's disappearance. None of it was coincidence, and someone was going to great lengths to make sure they didn't dig any further. The call connected, and Nathan immediately switched to speaker. Lawson, he said, voice clipped, we need to meet now. There was a pause on the other end. Then a sigh. Damn it. What happened? Someone's watching us. Leaving notes. They know we have Jax. Another pause, this one longer, heavier. Meet me at Baldwin's Diner. 30 minutes. The line went dead before Nathan could reply. Olivia raised a brow. Guess we're going to Baldwin's. Nathan grabbed his jacket, checking his holster before glancing at Jax, who was already on his feet, waiting. And we're taking him with us. The drive to the diner was silent, the kind of silence that wasn't comfortable, but wasn't exactly suffocating either. Olivia's fingers tapped against her knee, her mind still reeling from the night's events. Nathan kept his grip firm on the wheel, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every so often, checking for tails. Jax sat in the back seat, his head occasionally lifting to sniff at the air, his body coiled with a tension that neither officer missed. By the time they pulled into the nearly empty parking lot of Baldwin's, Olivia's nerves were thrumming. The neon sign flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow over the damp pavement as she and Nathan stepped out, scanning their surroundings before heading inside. Jack stayed close, his body moving like a shadow between them, ever vigilant. The diner was quiet at this hour. Only a few scattered patrons hunched over coffee cups and newspapers. In the farthest booth, near the window, a man sat nursing a mug, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the ceramic. Henry Lawson had aged in the way most former detectives did, lines carved deep into his face, hair graying at the temples, eyes sharp but tired. He looked up as they approached, his gaze flickering to Jack's before settling on them. "You weren't supposed to find him," he said before they even had a chance to sit. Nathan slid into the booth across from him, Olivia following suit. "Yeah, well, we did," Lawson sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You don't get it. Jax wasn't supposed to come back." Olivia's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, glancing around before leaning in slightly. 3 years ago, when that operation went south, we all assumed Jax was killed. Hell, we were meant to assume that. But I started digging after Calloway died, and the pieces didn't add up. Someone covered it up. Someone wanted Jax gone permanently. Nathan's jaw clenched. "Why?" Lawson exhaled slowly, looking at Jax again, his expression unreadable. "Because he saw something he wasn't supposed to." The words sent a chill straight down Olivia's spine. She glanced at Jax, at the intelligent glint in his eyes, at the scars littering his body. And suddenly everything made too much sense. "They used him," she whispered, realization dawning. "The smuggling ring. They took him after the operation failed." Lawson nodded grimly. "Not just them. Someone on the inside helped make it happen." Nathan swore under his breath. "And now they know we have him, which means you're in serious trouble," Lawson said, his voice heavy with something close to regret. "These aren't low-level criminals. They have reach power. And if they think Jax being alive jeopardizes them, they won't stop at leaving notes." Olivia tightened her grip on the edge of the table. "So what do we do?" Lawson hesitated, then leaned in further. "You do what they don't expect. You go after them first." The weight of Lawson's words settled between them like an anvil, heavy and unmovable. Olivia swallowed hard, exchanging a glance with Nathan, whose expression was carved from stone. This wasn't just about uncovering a forgotten case anymore, it was about survival. If what Lawson said was true, they weren't just dealing with criminals. They were dealing with powerful people who had spent the last 3 years making sure their operation remained in the dark. Jax being alive was a crack in their foundation, a threat they clearly weren't willing to ignore. Olivia glanced down at the dog lying beside her, his body tense, his dark eyes flickering between them as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Maybe he did. After all, Jax had spent 3 years in the hands of these people. 3 years surviving when everyone believed him dead. There was no telling what he had seen or endured. And now, he had come back, carrying secrets in the scars that littered his body. Nathan exhaled sharply, leaning forward. "If we go after them first, we need something solid. We need to know who the hell we're dealing with." Lawson hesitated, his fingers drumming against his mug. "I might have a lead, but it's risky. The guy I'm thinking of, he was part of the operation back then. Low-level enforcer, but he knew things. Problem is, he went off the grid after Calloway died." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "And you think he's still alive?" Lawson nodded. "People like him don't disappear. They lay low, wait for things to blow over. But I've heard whispers. If he's still in the city, there's a good chance he's hiding in the old dockyards. Smuggling operations don't just vanish, they evolve." Nathan clenched his jaw. "So we find him, and we get him to talk." Lawson exhaled, shaking his head. "It's not that simple. If you go looking for him, they'll know. And if they know, they'll come for you before you get close." Olivia's pulse quickened, the realization settling in her chest like ice. This wasn't just a matter of chasing down leads anymore. This was a game of cat and mouse, and they weren't sure yet which role they played. She looked at Nathan, who was already reaching for his keys. "Then we don't give them the chance," he said. "We move fast." The drive to the dockyards was silent, the tension thick enough to strangle. Nathan kept his eyes on the road, his grip firm on the wheel, while Olivia tapped into the police database, searching for any old reports that might hint at their target's whereabouts. Jax lay curled in the back seat, his ears flicking at every passing sound. His body coiled like a spring. He knew. He could feel the shift in the air, the way danger loomed just ahead. Olivia's screen flickered as a name popped up: Eric Dorn, former enforcer for a suspected smuggling ring. Last known location tied to a warehouse near the docks. No official records in the past 3 years. A ghost. But even ghosts left footprints if you knew where to look. "This is our guy," she murmured. Nathan glanced over, nodding. "Then let's find him." The docks loomed ahead, shrouded in fog. The scent of salt and rust thickened the air. The water lapped against the pylons, the sound eerie in the stillness of the night. The warehouses stood like silent sentinels, their windows dark, their walls covered in years of neglect and decay. Olivia scanned the area, her fingers instinctively brushing against her holster. Something felt off. Too quiet. Too empty. Nathan pulled the cruiser into the shadows, killing the engine. "We go in quiet," he murmured. "No sirens, no backup. Just us." Olivia nodded, glancing at Jax. "You ready, boy?" The shepherd lifted his head, his eyes sharp, his body already moving before she even opened the door. He was ready. He had always been ready. The moment they stepped onto the pavement, the tension thickened. Olivia's boots made no sound against the damp concrete as she moved alongside Nathan, her pulse thrumming in her ears. They kept to the shadows, their eyes scanning every darkened corner, every shifting silhouette in the fog. Jax moved like a ghost beside them, his body low, his senses razor-sharp. Ahead, a faint glow flickered from the cracks of a warehouse door, a sign of life. Nathan motioned for Olivia to follow, his hand hovering over his weapon as they approached. The door was slightly ajar, the dim light casting long, eerie shadows inside. Olivia's breath hitched as she pushed it open, revealing the cluttered interior: old crates, rusted chains, the remnants of a long-abandoned operation. And then, in the farthest corner, a figure. Eric Dorn was a wreck of a man, his frame gaunt, his beard unkempt, his eyes darting wildly as he sat hunched over a table covered in scattered papers. The second he saw them, he bolted. "Hey," Nathan barked, surging forward, but Jax was faster. The shepherd launched himself forward, cutting off Dorn's escape, his sharp growl freezing the man in his tracks. Dorn stumbled back, hands raised, his breath ragged. "I don't know anything," he wheezed, his voice hoarse from disuse. Olivia stepped closer, her gaze narrowing. "We haven't even asked the question yet." Dorn swallowed hard, his eyes flicking between them, then to Jax, whose teeth glinted in the dim light. You shouldn't be here," he stammered. "They'll know. They'll come for you." Nathan's expression hardened. "Who?" "The same people who left this dog for dead." Dorn flinched, his gaze flickering with something close to fear. "You don't get it," he rasped. "It's bigger than you think. It's not just about the smuggling. It never was." Olivia's pulse quickened. "Then tell us what it is." Dorn hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides. He looked at Jax again, something unreadable in his expression. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, "It's not just dogs they're trafficking." The room went still. Olivia's stomach twisted as the weight of his words settled over them like a suffocating fog. Nathan's jaw clenched. "What do you mean?" Dorn exhaled shakily. "I mean they started with dogs. K-9 units, trained for high-level operations. But they expanded. They're not just moving weapons and drugs anymore." He swallowed hard, his voice dropping lower. "They're moving people." Olivia's breath caught. The realization hit like a freight train. This wasn't just about Jax. This wasn't just about an old case gone wrong. They had walked straight into something much bigger, much darker than they had ever imagined. And now, there was no turning back. The air in the warehouse turned suffocating as Dorn's words settled between them, thick and heavy like a storm cloud about to break. Olivia's heartbeat pounded against her ribs, her fingers tightening instinctively around her holster. This wasn't just about Jax. This wasn't just about a smuggling ring gone unchecked. This was something far worse, something that had remained hidden beneath the surface for years, moving in the dark while the world remained blissfully unaware. Nathan's jaw clenched, his eyes burning into Dorn with a mixture of fury and urgency. "You're saying they're trafficking people, using trained dogs to move them like cargo?" Dorn swallowed hard, nodding. "It started small. High-value contraband, weapons, drugs. But the higher-ups, they realized they had something no one was looking at. These dogs, especially XK9 South, are trained for precision discipline. They started using them to move things in and out of locations people never suspected. Then they escalated. Live cargo. People. Some of them were never seen again." His voice broke on the last words, and Olivia felt something cold settle deep in her stomach. Jax let out a low growl beside her, his body tense. His eyes locked onto Dorn like he understood every horrifying detail spilling from his lips. Nathan exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair as he paced. "Who's in charge of this operation? Give me names." Dorn hesitated, shifting in place, his eyes darting toward the shadows like he expected something, or someone to appear from the darkness and silence him. "I don't know," he muttered. "Not exactly, but there's someone. They call him the broker. No real name, no face, just a voice. He arranges the shipments, coordinates the movements, and he has people everywhere. Cops, judges. You think you're safe, but you're not. The second they know you're close, you're already dead." Olivia's breath hitched as a realization struck her like a gut punch. "That's why they left the notes," she murmured. "They weren't just threats. They were warnings. They were giving us a chance to back off before they took action." Nathan's fists clenched. "Too bad for them. We don't scare easy." Dorn let out a humorless laugh. "Then you're idiots, because they're already watching you." Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but something in the air shifted. A sound faint, distant, but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the warehouse. Jax's ears snapped forward, a growl rumbling deep in his chest. Olivia's fingers flew to her weapon, her breath catching as the realization slammed into her. They had been talking too long. They had been followed. "Move," Nathan snapped, grabbing Dorn by the collar and shoving him toward the back entrance. Olivia kept close, her pulse a war drum in her ears as they moved quickly, quietly. Jax pressed against her leg, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. The moment they reached the door, the first shot rang out. The bullet slammed into the metal frame, just inches from Olivia's head, sparks flying as she ducked, yanking Dorn down with her. "Go, go," Nathan shouted, returning fire toward the shadows. Jax snarled, his body tense as Olivia shoved Dorn forward, forcing him to run as gunfire erupted behind them. The warehouse turned into a battlefield in an instant, the sounds of bullets ricocheting off steel and concrete echoing through the air. They sprinted through the narrow alley, their breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as the distant roar of an engine signaled reinforcements closing in. Nathan swore under his breath. "They're boxing us in." Olivia's mind raced. They needed an out. Fast. "The docks," she panted. "If we can make it to the South Pier, we might have a chance." Dorn hesitated, shaking his head. "You don't get it," he rasped. "You think you're the hunters, but you're the prey. They've already decided you're dead." Nathan grabbed him by the shirt, shoving him against the wall. "Then maybe it's time we prove them wrong." Another round of gunfire cracked through the air. Too close, too precise. Jax barked sharply, his body twisting as if sensing something before Olivia did. And then she saw a dark figure moving fast, cutting them off before they could reach the docks. More shapes emerged from the fog, surrounding them like wolves closing in for the kill. The broker's men, the ones who had been watching, tracking, waiting. Olivia's breath came fast, her fingers flexing against the grip of her gun. There were too many. No easy way out. But she refused to die in the shadows, not when the truth was so close. Jax moved first. The shepherd lunged, faster than the gunmen could react, his powerful form colliding with the nearest attacker, teeth sinking into flesh as a scream tore through the air. The distraction was all Olivia and Nathan needed. They fired in unison, dropping to more before diving for cover. Dorn scrambled behind them, his breath ragged as he clutched his bleeding arm. "They won't stop," he wheezed. "You think this ends here? The broker has more men than you can count." Olivia ignored him, her focus razor sharp as she reloaded. "Then we take them all down." Nathan turned to her, his expression unreadable, but there was something fierce in his gaze, something unshakable. "We end this." The gunfire intensified as they moved, ducking and weaving through crates and abandoned boats, Jack's never leaving their side. The dog was relentless, his instincts razor-sharp, his loyalty unwavering. He had survived 3 years of hell, and now he was fighting to finish what had started the night Calloway died. One by one, the gunmen fell. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood as the last shot rang out, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Dorn was curled against a stack of crates, breathing hard, his face pale. Olivia's hands trembled as she lowered her weapon, her chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. Jack stood beside her, his coat streaked with grime and sweat, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Nathan nudged a fallen gunman with his boot, exhaling sharply. They were willing to die to keep this buried. Olivia wiped a hand down her face, exhaustion creeping into her bones. "Then we make sure it doesn't stay buried." By the time backup arrived, the docks were littered with bodies and bullet casings, the remnants of a battle fought in the shadows. But it wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until they found the broker, until they exposed every name connected to this operation. As they stood there, battered and bruised, but victorious, Olivia glanced at Jax, her fingers brushing over his head. "Looks like you found your way back for a reason," she murmured. The shepherd let out a low huff, leaning into her touch, and for the first time that night, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at justice.